Welcome back to another episode of Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I chat with Dr. Michael Durnin. He is a leader whose journey spans from college football coaching, higher education administration, and then really doing what he does now, which is around coaching and mentoring and his work in the community and nonprofit space as well. We had a really great chat just based on his lifetime of experience and working with not only young people, but then just really leaders in different parts of their different level areas of their lives. And we talked about this idea of inevitable chaos and how do we actually manage through that chaos? How do we prepare for the unexpected? And how do we just get through the chaos that is just inevitable in most of our lives and careers? And I really think it's just about, how do we prepare for it? How do we build that resilience? How do we build that mental strength and maybe even sometimes physical strength to be able to get through the chaos that might occur? So it was really interesting to hear his perspective on just building resilience, the importance of community as well and connection, and why learning to stay calm is a skill worth cultivating for all of us. So I learned a lot in this conversation. He brings a wealth of experience from his own life and the stories of others that he's worked with. So check it out. Let me know what you think. And as always, subscribe, share, comment, and come back for more. Mike, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Well, Elena, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. I love what you are doing to help transform lives of others. So truly, truly a pleasure being here today.
Thank you. And the honor is mine. And you have done a great job transforming lives yourself, whether it's on the sports fields or in higher education or the work that you're doing now. And I'm really excited to chat with you about that. And particularly, how do we navigate chaos? And, you have had a very dynamic and rich career in different spaces. And I think there's a lot that you can bring to the table that my audience, particularly the younger audience that I have, can really benefit from, but myself included as well. I'll put myself not so young maybe, but I'll put myself in that category of somebody who's still learning and growing. So, but take me back to your career story, and kind of what got you to what you're doing today.
Sure, I appreciate that. And your concept of we still learn, I believe that all the time. So I mean, I think we continue to learn. Basically, after I got done with college, I went right into college football coaching. So I was doing that and then teaching classes for people who were going to be physical education teachers in K-12 systems. And along the way, I had a variety of administrative roles, some within recreational sports, some in intramural sports, facilities, etc. And that lasted my entire career until the last probably half a dozen years, where I ended up in the world of higher education, the C-suite level, the cabinet level, where I was basically in charge of student life, and which was a whole different role for me in what I was doing. So that really, in a nutshell, that kind of shows you my career. As I joked with a group yesterday I was speaking with, I've lived in 7 different states, 12 different homes.
Wow.
So I have kind of seen the world a little bit that way. And all of those experiences, though, have really shaped and provided me for what I do today, which is quite basically, I'd like to share my experiences with professionals and students alike. Here are things I've learned. Here are things I failed at along the way. And if I can help, serve others by having them avoid some of the pitfalls that I experience, then I feel good about what's happening.
Yeah. And you know what's super powerful about that, which is why I love podcasts and not only listening to them, but also producing this podcast, is that I think this is what we lack so often these days is that mentorship, that sometimes we want advice, a coach, right? And we might not be able to afford one, but it's like if somebody can just, who has a wealth of experience like you, who can just share like certain things,
Right.
it's like, because we don't know what we don't know and not everybody has access. And that's what I love about, again, like listen to podcasts. It gives that accessibility and
Yeah.
availability no matter what you're going through. Pick a topic, and then the people there to really give some of their best advice. And obviously people who have that background and history and true live their life, like you have. So like this is kind of what's powerful about that. So I think it's awesome that you're doing that. And I would love to frame this conversation around that overcoming, how do you navigate chaos, setback
Yeah.
challenges? I think that's a good conversation to cover because I see a lot of not only young people, but just like across board. I think that, life is just chaotic. I
Yeah.
feel like there's always, which is, part of it could be good chaos, bad chaos, but all of it is challenging. And if you're not used to it, if you don't have the resilience or the tough skin for it, it can be very impactful in a negative way. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you view chaos? Tell me some stories. I know you got plenty of stories about chaos and setbacks and challenges. Let's go into that.
Well, I think first of all, chaos, as we alluded to, I mean, the setbacks and challenges are inevitable. They are going to happen in our lives. We're going to have unplanned for events, normally daily, that are going to happen. And I think it's part of a mindset. And what's really come to light, what's interesting is if you look at the science of fusion, you're taking molecules and fusing them together to produce energy. Well, when we take chaos and fuse that with the order of our lives, we become stronger.
Mm.
And, so I think there's some science there. D Hawk, who was the CEO of Visa, which people might not recognize the name, but I know they recognize the name Visa because we usually have one of those cards in our possession. And he coined a term called chaotic leadership,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a part of servant leadership. And chaotic leadership is that fusion of chaos and order in our lives. And so when we embrace the chaos, those unplanned for situations, we don't have to like them. But when we embrace them as they are now part of our story, we become a better version of ourselves. And I think that's step number one is just a simple mindset. How do I embrace chaos? Knowing I don't have to like it, but it is now a part of my story and a story that is going to allow me to be a better version of myself. And so that's how the mindset that goes into it. And then I think, as I spoke to a group yesterday on this, to me, there's a simple toolkit that I think we all need. And the first tool is the ability to stay calm. Now, how we do that, I think, is the planning for it. I'm not trying to be, a downer on this. It's realize chaos is going to happen. Let's plan for it. I might not know exactly what's going to happen, but if I know chaos is going to happen in my life, I can remain calm. And I'll
Mm.
share a quick story.
Yeah.
Earlier today, I'm actually helping my daughter. Her car needed to get to the shop, and I needed to drop her off somewhere else. And I'm taking this road, and all of a sudden, knowing I had to be on this, we were going to record this show. There's this tractor that's going down the highway that basically said, Mike, now instead of driving 55 miles an hour, you're driving 15 miles per hour. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I can look at it two ways. I can be really upset, mad, keep trying to swerve, see if I could pass, or just calmly just stay behind. And I just calmly stayed behind and said, okay, this is what it is. Just relax, enjoy some of the scenery, so to speak, and you'll still get there. It will still all work out. And I think that calmness is what we need to, and I speak of that as a skill. So
Mm-hmm.
when we consistently and continually think, how am I going to remain calm in a variety of situations? We become better at it. Just
Mm-hmm.
like a little child becoming better at walking. They fall down that first time, they fall down the second time, but they continually keep working at it and they become proficient at walking. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first tool. The second tool is, and I think this, I know you had a show, I think one of your most recent shows, you talked about behavioral health and mental
Mm-hmm.
health. And when the tool that I think is really necessary, we're going to need others. We're going to need others to help us. We're going to need others to encourage us. We're going to need others to be present in our lives. And at times, we're going to have to do those for others that we know. We need to be able to help others. We need to be able to be there to encourage. We need to be present. And, you know, in the world of leadership, you don't do that alone. But more importantly, in life, we're going to need others. So the first two tools I think that relate to navigating chaos, stay calm, and you're going to need others.
Mm-hmm.
Then my last two really go with the mindset. One is I call it the no matter what,
I like that.
and no matter what, what's my vision for my life? What's my purpose? And so that's kind of like your address, where you live, and you need to keep that at the forefront. And the next one tool, the fourth tool I talk about is the mindset of then some. And it's like going that extra mile. And knowing that, okay, I don't like what's just happened, it's chaotic, but I might have to do a little bit extra work. I'm going to have to spend a little extra time. Uh, had recently had a friend who passed away. And okay, my and then some is that outreach to their family and friends. Wasn't planned for, but you need to do those things to navigate the chaos that's actually happened in your life, but the chaos that's happened in others' lives. And we do all of this by the two things we really control: attitude and effort.
Mm.
After that, who knows? But we control our attitude and we control our effort. And with those tools, I think we enable ourselves to better handle chaos.
Mm. I really like these. As you're speaking, I've had my own, I was kind of thinking about my own stories within that. So number one, kind of just, part of it is like what you mentioned is essentially just acceptance, like accept what is, like prepare for it, like accept that this is going to happen. Like in your case, like,
Yep.
getting stuck behind a tractor. I think acceptance is a big part of it because that almost speaks to me like, okay, once you accept it, then you kind of say, okay, this is happening, and maybe it will shift your focus to things you can control and cannot control.
Right.
And like you cannot control the fact that you're just going to go in 15 miles an hour. You cannot maybe go around the
Right.
tractor if it's a one-way type thing, one lane. But what you can control is like your emotions within that,
Yep.
and then the other. So, and actually, I want to kind of stay here for a moment. I don't know if it's healthy, but you know what works for me, and I've just kind of. I mean, I'm sure like if there's like a therapist or psychologist listening to this, they're going to be like, you need to talk to somebody. But literally, because I just went through this. So my birthday's coming up in a few days, and every year before my birthday, I go through this existential crisis of like, I'm not doing enough. I did not reach my goals, and it's
Yep.
like this, just like self-attack, this criticism, and so I'll go into like a really deep hole mentally for like a day. But I also know because I do this every year. I also know that I have to do this because that's how I motivate myself. And though like it's not healthy probably because it's very self-critical and I'm sure there's a lot of issues with that, etc. But it's what drives me.
Mhm.
Like it's actually what drives me. So sometimes it's like, it's what and then I have to go through this acceptance of like, okay, well, I didn't do X, Y, and Z that I was supposed to do this past year, and it's almost like this beating myself up about it.
Yep.
But then I come back like the next day or the day after, like so much stronger, and I'm just like on my things. I'm like, let's
Right.
go. So I don't know if it's healthy, but I go through that. What are your thoughts on that?
But, you know, one of the things when we have a great purpose in life, and I talked about the address. Okay, so my address is very simple. Want to know every day in every way, living life, creating a transformation of self and others to be better. So that doesn't matter whether I was coaching,
Mm,
teaching, an administrator, uh, a husband, a parent, a grandparent. That transcends across all those avenues, all those how I do it. But I don't want to ever lose that focus. And to me, it's a conviction. A conviction. You have a conviction for what you're doing. And that conviction really drives you more than motivation, more than passion. You have a conviction, and conviction is good. Though we all need, I talk about one and oh, I have to always remember I'm not perfect. No one's perfect.
hmm.
And so there must be some grace there to allow for our imperfections and say, okay, I'm not perfect. I didn't accomplish this, but I get another opportunity.
Yeah.
I need to see past the chaos. I need to see past this. As you know, I'll share. I mean, I have a doctorate in ministry, so I will share. There's a great in Second Corinthians it talks walk by faith, not by sight.
Mm,
Well, I can apply that in a lot of different worlds. And what it basically, to me, it means, okay, there's chaos, there's a situation. I need to take my vision beyond that
mm,
and say, all right, now how am I going to look to solve this? So we're all going to experience those days where we feel like, I did not get this done. I did not get this accomplished. That chaos, remember, we don't have to like it. We just need to embrace it and
mm,
say, how am I going to look beyond this into the future and what am I going to do different? And as long as we allow ourselves some grace there, and I'm
mm.
not a behavioral psychologist or anything like that, so you and I are both going to probably get some phone calls. I think you might have missed on this a little bit, but for me, it truly is okay. How do I see beyond this? How do I learn from what I'm doing to make myself better, to
Mm,
transform myself. And along the way, because I really believe in servant leadership, I think we're here to serve others. Okay.
mm,
And when I talk about leadership, I talk about it as being a skill of caring for, positively caring for, and inspiring others
mm.
to work enthusiastically toward goals being for the common good. Well, I do have to do that for myself because I think we must always remember we lead ourselves before we ever can think about leading others.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so we need to care for ourselves, and part of that caring is having some grace to know that we're not perfect, and
Mm,
that's okay. And that's what makes us beautiful, makes you beautiful, makes everyone beautiful is we're our imperfections.
mm. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna clip this for myself and keep this for my next birthday whenever I go down the deep hole. I like that. No, I think grace is very, very important. The other part that you mentioned, the second part is that we need others, we need that community, and I see
Yep.
this, so much more these days. And of course, there's a lot of data and a lot of information around it. A loneliness epidemic, especially in some, strangely enough, in like the bigger cities where people are so career driven. And it's like we became so career successful in many cases, but we lost the community. We are lonelier
Yep.
than ever. Our
Yep.
social batteries are very low. A lot of the young people are not even able, completely lacking social skills, frankly speaking,
Yep.
to be able to connect. We're getting married, we're getting into relationships later, getting married later. It's almost like we're just becoming very individualized. And, maybe that's the conservative side of me speaking, but I think that it leads to a larger issue, which is like we're losing the community and that
Yep.
need for others. So I'm curious, like,
Yep.
yeah, no, just what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's what I see in your work. Like, have you seen over the years that
Yep.
we've just declined?
Yeah, I think we're losing connection. We're
Mm,
losing connection with people. We're connected by technology, but in terms of a deeper connection, really learning about others. I'm a big fan of the Ted Lasso show, which I think is one of the best things that's come out in recent history. And he uses the Walt Whitman quote, be curious, not judgmental. We
Mhm.
need to be curious about others.
Yeah.
And we need to connect and ask questions and develop relationships and develop trust, uh, and stand with people. Last week, as part of one of the things that I do is I serve on the board of directors. I actually serve as president of the Chris Norton Foundation. And last week we sponsored our wheelchair camp. We had 30 young people with either spinal cord and or neuromuscular challenges, along with family members. We bring them in for a camp, give them all kinds of experiences, from horseback riding to zip lining to laser tag to soccer, you name it, we do it. But the best part of the entire camp is the connections these young people form with each other, even when they have very little in terms of being able to communicate verbally. And just as important is the connection between the family members. And we need to build upon those types of experiences for people. And yet, and you talked about one of the dilemmas, I'm going to share this without mentioning names, but I talked to this one mother and their child had been injured, now is in a wheelchair, and almost all of this child's friends have abandoned him
Mhm.
because he's different. And yet I know the power because with Chris's story, he had a great faith, he had unbelievable family, but he also had great friends that never left his side, that stood with him, dragged him to activities, you know, made him always be a part.
Mhm.
And that showed me the power of friendship, the power of connections. And
Yeah.
when you hear these other stories, it just resonates like we still have a lot of work to do in terms of teaching people how to have conversations with each other. I actually did, I adjuncted an ethics class for a local university this spring. Never once put a PowerPoint up on the board. It was all discussion based. And that was how the great students were basically graded. They needed to learn and experience what it meant to be in conversation with each other.
Mhm.
And to me, watching them develop through the course of the semester was was fabulous. It inspired me. And I know we can get there, but I think we consciously and intentionally need to keep promoting conversations in our schools, in our families, in our communities. Conversation, and I talk a lot about we need to continue to learn. You and I mentioned that at the beginning of the show. We learn through books, which is great. Nowadays we have technology, we have TED Talks, podcasts. We have this wealth of information at our hands. But part of learning is also being in conversation. And some of the best learning happens in conversation. And so we need to do everything we can to promote those types of connections, those
Mhm.
conversations.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, absolutely. I think it's such a missing piece. And yes, conversations just because like I've said this before on my podcast, but part of the one of the biggest lessons for me through this podcast now, I'm over 200 episodes in, is I've became so much more empathetic. I thought I was
Mhm.
pretty empathetic before. I realized I wasn't. I became so much more empathetic because I would talk to so many people from different backgrounds, from different stories, just and I would get to know them with my audience on the
Yep.
podcast. And it just, and it's through that conversation, not only did I learn so much and I realized how much I don't know and how limited my perspectives were and how biased I was in so many areas, it made me more open-minded, more empathetic, understanding that I don't know a lot of things and that everybody has a story and everybody has a lot to contribute to the discussion. I think it's,
Yeah.
you just learn so much. You learn so much about yourself through those conversations, even if you're not doing the talking, just through listening, you're actually learning about yourself. Like it's wild. So I think that's super, super important. The other things that you mentioned around the mindset, which I love, the third and fourth kind of pieces to this is like no matter what mindset. And I think that's so important because we tend to give up, and I think that's the hardest part is
Yeah.
like, like again, I go into a deep hole sometimes where I'm just like I just need I need self-pity, and I know I need that, but I also know maximum 24 hours, if that, I'm out of it. This is my process, it works for
Yeah.
me. I don't recommend it for everybody, it's probably not healthy, but it works for me. But I think a lot of times we get stuck, and I think it's hard because you train your brain to get stuck in that part.
Yeah.
What are some tips, like, when somebody's faced with a challenge or setback, like, how do you apply this no matter what mindset? Like, what are some baby steps you can do?
Well, I think you nailed it with the 24 hours
Mm,
because within, I spent my, over 35 years as a college football coach. And we had a rule. No matter what happened on Saturday afternoon in a game,
mm,
by Sunday afternoon, we're moving on. We had 24 hours. You could 24 hours celebrate. You had 24 hours to sulk and be mad about how the game transpired, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the 24 hours, and we consciously talked about this with team members, we're moving on. It is time. Now we want to learn from what
right.
happened, okay? Because it's always great, people talk about resilience. Well, resilience comes from living experiences. And so we want to learn from it, but we need to move on. So I think right there, that 24 hours is key. And and when I talk about the no matter what, I love using the example of Nelson Mandela. Became president of South Africa. Though most people sometimes forget, he also spent 27 years in prison
Hmm.
prior to becoming president of South Africa. And that no matter what, when I talk about, walk by faith, not by sight, he could see in front of him the brick walls of the prison. He could see as they were moving rocks
Mm,
what they were doing. But his real vision never left his thought of a better South Africa.
mm,
And so I think that's a great lesson to learn for all of us is we need to continually know what is our real purpose and what is, in athletics, as a matter of fact, I was doing a one-on-one with a high school coach speaking about what's your vision of how your team looks? What is your vision for how they practice? Your vision for how they play? Let's be real descriptive of that. Because now once you have that, now you can backtrack and say, how are we going to develop those things? And so for each of us is what's our vision? And now what habits, what skills do we need to develop to make that vision become reality?
that's powerful. I like that. The last part you mentioned is the going the extra mile. The way I interpret that is, almost like when I think about going the extra mile, I think about people who have overcome their own comfort zones, people who have pushed the boundaries, people who have walked through fear, right? Like I'll have one of my favorite quotes that I mention quite often on podcasts is it says, have fear, but don't have doubt. So like, even if you're afraid to do something, like I think it's going that extra mile and pushing through. Is that how I can interpret that, or how would you say that?
Elena, I think you're spot on with that as well. You know, we all have fear. We live, most humans have a fear of rejection,
Hmm.
a fear of failure. But we still need to be in the arena of life. We still need to put one foot in front of the other, continually moving onward and forward. And it doesn't mean we do things that are uncalculated and risk factor, though I have a fear of heights, huge fear of heights. Yet I have jumped out of a perfectly good airplane a couple times.
Well,
So
good for you.
I,
I could
I,
never
I,
do it.
I've tried to eliminate or at least tackle that fear in that manner. But I think, when we're ready to go and then some, it's because of that conviction for our purpose. And there years ago, there was a young lady, Julie Moss is her name, who did the Hawaiian Ironman, and she did it as a research project for exercise physiology, her master's degree. And she was actually winning the race with
Mhm.
about 2 miles to go, and her body gave out.
Wow.
And she dropped, got up, dropped again, so forth. And of course, when your body is completely exhausted, uh, you know, you have no control over any bodily functions, etc. But she ended up because her conviction was there, and she was knew her purpose. She crawled to the finish line. Now she didn't end up
Mhm.
winning, not in terms of placement
Yeah,
of medals, etc. But I think she won a lot bigger prize
for sure.
because she was willing to go and then some.
Mm.
And the medical people were kind of walking right with her, so they knew, you know, if something really happened, okay, we're done. But she was well enough to crawl across that finish line. And in some days, I mean, we've all lived this. I don't think you want to do this all the time. But, we've pulled that all-nighter as a student because we were so convicted to do well on this test. Now,
Mhm.
hopefully it wasn't because you forgot to study for 3 weeks prior to it. But, we've done that. As coaches, we have spent hours upon hours watching film. People will have aspects of life that happen. Okay. I mentioned the Chris Norton story, and I think this is, to go in and then some. The day he was injured, which will be 15 years this October. I remember getting to the hospital that evening, and this was 7, 8 o'clock at night, and Chris was getting ready to go to surgery, and I remember his father looked at me and said, "Mike, you and Karen, my wife, should just go home. We're not going to be able to do anything." And I basically looked at him and said, Terry, I'm not going anywhere. You know, this is too important. Chris is a player, somebody I recruited. I consider him family because of that. And yeah, the next week was tough because I was basically working on zero sleep. However, I knew I had to go and then some for
Mhm.
Chris, for his family, for the team. And when you have that conviction, I think you have that power within you to go and then some.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I really like this. It's very practical. I love the 4 steps. The first one is just
Mm.
preparing for it, that acceptance, being
Yeah,
around other people, that community, the mindset of like no matter what, right? Because then it
yeah,
just gives you that purpose. And I think,
yeah,
it just sometimes it just takes a while to get there, but I think it's like through practice we build that up. And then some, right? Going that extra mile and doing what you need to do. I love it. It's practical. I think it's a great reminder for myself first and foremost, but I think also for my audience, and I think anybody can apply it, not just young people. I think across board, we all need that reminder. And it's yeah, I like these 4 steps. Is there anything else that you want to kind of the message you want to put out there before we wrap up this conversation? What else would you like to share with my audience that might be equally as powerful?
sure. Well, Elena, this has been fabulous. I love conversations like this because I think to me it's a great learning, uh,
Mhm.
both a two-way street and hopefully your audience. I was more than happy to learn from them as well. But as I close, final thoughts, I speak a lot about, building our foundation, a
Mhm.
foundation for leading ourselves. And from that, I, in essence, and I'm a simple person, so I like to work in simplicity, what I call my handful of L's. And so I would ask all of us to keep our minds and our hearts and our souls open, to continue to learn, continue to laugh. Laughter is a great medicine. Rest and renew is part of laughter. So continue to learn, continue to laugh, continue to listen. Listen like a sponge to understand. Continue to live, because we have to be in the arena, and continue to love. A sacrificial, agape love, that because people really don't care what you know until they know that you care. And when you do those 5 L's, learn, laugh, listen, live, and love, you will get a bonus L. The bonus L of legacy.
Mm.
Not only the legacy you leave upon others, but more importantly, the legacy others leave upon you.
Beautiful. What a great way to end a podcast. So nice. Where can people find you? Where they can get in touch with you? Where do you hang out at the most?
I am on LinkedIn. I kind of live and die with that one. I'm the only Mike Durnin with the initials DMIN at the end because I have a doctorate in ministry. So
Mhm.
fairly easy to find right there. Or if they want to, more than happy, I can share a assessment and how they do the handful of L's. If you text 33777 and input the code NWM, and I will send free of charge my assessment in terms of evaluating a handful of L's.
Sounds good. And I'll make sure to include that in the show notes as well. Mike, thank you so much. It's been a soulful conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Elaine. It's been a pleasure and honor to be on your show. And like I said at the beginning, I really love how you are looking to transform the lives of others and really transform their total life. You got so many different things that you bring forward for your audience, and that is to be commended.
Thank you.